My dad kind of had a happy childhood, but a difficult childhood. His dad died when he was 9 years old, still kind of a depression years. He was born in 1930, and so when he was 1939, he had to go to work, and his mom was obviously single and having to work. And Dad took jobs at the hardware store there in Glencoe, Minnesota. He worked at the Green Giant factory as well as a lumber yard there. And then as he got older, around 14 or 15, he worked out at the railroads and was using a jackhammer. So he had, it was a tough jobs in that era for a 15-year-old boy.
My dad was quite the athlete. He played football, baseball, basketball in high school in Glencoe, Minnesota. And then he went on to the University of Minnesota and played football for the Golden Gophers. And this rubbed off on me as well as my brothers, as I played football and baseball in high school. And then I went on to the University of Florida and pitched for the Florida Gator baseball team.
When I met him, he was already in law school by that time, his first year law school. And my roommate was dating an Alpha Delta, and I had just broken up with a young man, and she said, well, let's get an Alpha Delta because they're such great guys. So we looked at, when we got to Bill Merrill, she said, no, he just studies all the time. And so, but then we did, of course, meet in the summertime. Bill taught swimming for Crow Wing County, so he went all over Crow Wing County, which is Brainerd and the Northern Lake area. But this is also where we had our water ski show. None of us got paid. We skied for our suits and for the gas in the boat and the skis. Bill managed our show, so he got paid, which figures. It was the time of the Korean conflict, and so he was in ROTC. In fact, he was the commander for the ROTC at the University of Minnesota. And as a result, after law school, we were married at Christmas time because there wasn't going to be any time. He was going to be going right from the bar exam into the military. And he was very fortunate to be selected to go to the War College.
So Bill moved to Sarasota immediately after leaving the Air Force. Well, Bill would then call me and say, how about your vow to live in Florida, Texas, or California? He said, Florida's just booming, and it's like a big pie, and we can cut out as big a piece as we want. And you got to come to Florida. He says, or I'll be up there with my Cadillac to run over you. Anyway, that was Bill. And we always thought alike. We both thought that if you're going to spend a lot of time thinking, you ought to think big and not think small. And that was the essence of Bill Merrill. Always thought big and did things big.
We met at on the Old City Pier in 1959, I believe was the year. And we were both members of the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And our story starts then. And we became friends and socialized together as families. And then when I was working on a very large project way over my head as a young architect, I had opened my office in 1961. And I got a chance to do a retirement center, which evolved into what has become Plymouth Harbor. Bill was involved with me from a legal standpoint and with Plymouth Harbor in the early days, so we had our first real estate adventures at that time. From there, we went to Sandy Cove. I had known Mary Hook, the owner of and developer of Sandy Hook, a famous architect in her own right, who liked my work and asked if I would like to design on the property next to Sandy Hook. And I said, of course. He gave us a good price. I brought Bill Merrill into the project, and he and I partnered. He took care of the legal business end, and I took care of the design planning end. And generally, we both were marketing. So as a couple of young guys, we took on what became 113 clustered condominium units, and it was a trend setting for Florida because there hadn't been any clustered housing. Everything had been either high-rise or low barracks type apartments. After Sandy Cove, I was asked by a developer who owned a critical piece of property on the beach at the end of Ocean Boulevard at Beach Road, and with the Plymouth Harbor experience behind us, I thought that was a perfect place for a high-rise. We owned a unit ourselves at the top, which I wish we still owned, and had a wonderful time working together on that and scaring everybody with our 17-story building. So the county passed an ordinance to limit buildings to 9 stories, or 13 in some instances.
He also had a big development up in Georgia, North Carolina border, and it was between Dillard and Highlands. And this was an incredible development, and Dad did everything first class, and he did everything creatively in all of his developments. And one thing I remember in this development, that he always had to have these ponds, and so he actually constructed and built these ponds in different parts of the development. But he didn't stop there. He would go in and stock each of those ponds, not with a few fish, but I think one time he said he ordered like 10,000 rainbow trout to put in these ponds. And every day he would go out and feed them, and he would, with great excitement and pride, he would invite all his friends from Sarasota up there to not only show them the property and sell lots, but also to have them go fishing with their kids.
It seems like every summer Bill took a big fishing trip. And this wasn't just to the Gulf or to the Bahamas or Lake Okeechobee. I mean, he would go to the farthest ends of this continent, always in search of the biggest salmon ever. And he would go to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and he would come back every summer and tell stories about their trips, which are interesting, and flies and mosquitoes that were as big as horses out there, and how they had to, lather up in the lotion and have these big screens to protect themselves, and all those stories were fun. But one year he came back and he said, I caught a big salmon. In about 2 weeks, it showed up in Bill's office. He'd had it, taken it to a taxidermist and had it stuffed and mounted, and he brought it in, and it was a huge fish and a beauty as well. And so I don't know, and of course there was a lot of stories there about the big salmon that he caught and everything. So from that point on, within the firm, not necessarily among the staff, but among the fellow attorneys, someone pinned the nickname on Mr. Merrill as the Big Salmon.
Dad's love of the outdoors, I'm sure, came from his experiences in Boy Scouts. He was an Eagle Scout when he was a young man at 15, and was very involved in Order of the Arrow, which is kind of the honor society for Boy Scouts, and instilled that in all of us. Dad also is a founding member of Church of the Palms in Sarasota, and was also one of the elders for the longest time. And also during that period of time, there was a Boy Scout Troop 90 at Church of the Palms, and so he was the committee chair for that Troop 90 organization, and that's the troop that I was in and that I grew up in, and ultimately became a Boy Scout and an Eagle Scout. Of course, neither of my brothers quite made it that far.
I am so very happy to be present to honor my good friend and my mentor, Bill Merrill, also known to me as Guillermo. Bill and I, early in our relationship, decided we'd be calling each other by our, not our English names, but by our equivalent Spanish names. So Bill became Guillermo, and I, of course, became Miguel. And that lasted throughout our entire relationship over the many years.
I first met Bill when I joined the firm in early 1979. And the thing you have to understand if you didn't know Bill is that Bill was a big man. Everything about Bill was big. Big, broad shoulder, huge hands. When you shook hands with Bill, it was like trying to grab a ham, and had a head probably the size of Charlie Brown's. But when Bill was in the room, he was a presence. Everybody knew Bill was there. He was, he could be loud, but even when he wasn't loud, even when he wasn't saying anything, you knew Bill was there. Bill was, in my view, the consummate negotiator. He was a very tough guy to negotiate with. He would wear you down. Bill would pepper you with questions. He'd listen. He'd sit there. He wouldn't say anything. When you thought you'd made affirmative progress on one or two issues, and we're moving towards something else, Bill would take you right back to the beginning, and you'd start over again.
If it was condo docs or what it was, but anyway, he had missed 2 pages getting it signed. Well, the client had already left and was flying back to wherever, and Mr. Merrill, as he was going through it, he said, "Sally, you got to get this to the airport and get the client to sign these 2 pages. It has to be filed tomorrow," because Mr. Merrill was having me fly to Tallahassee the next day. So he said, "I don't care what you do, you stop that plane." So I actually drove my little yellow Volkswagen out onto the tarmac and stopped that plane. I didn't care, but it made sense to me. When Mr. Merrill told me to do something, I just did it. Yeah, I got him signed and I brought him back, and Mr. Merrill was very happy. He couldn't believe it. If I'd have done that today, I'd have been shot. That I thought I was a terrorist. But yeah, nope, right out on the tarmac. It was Dolphin Aviation.
Clients loved him, and he was a great rainmaker in the firm. And I think the reason they loved him is that Bill was totally committed to trying to achieve whatever his clients' goals were. And anything that was in the way, he had a tendency to just plow over. And that's one of the things that made Bill so effective as a lawyer. Bill was a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun to travel with. He was always late. Bill was late for, I think, everything that he ever went to. Bill would show up usually if we were flying someplace about the time that the door on the plane was going to close, and of course that's back before we had all the security measures we have now. And he would carry this briefcase, this leather briefcase that had just papers and newspapers and God knows what hanging out of it, and he would look a bit disheveled. But that was part of Bill's charm.
When I was about to be remarried to the trophy wife of my dreams, Ann Folsom Smith, we went to Bill Merrill, and he had recommended a prenuptial agreement, which is not something you want to spring on your young bride. So we went into the office one day, not either of us ever having seen the agreement, to read and sign the agreement. And we walk in, and there's Bill Merrill sitting at his desk, bare from the waist up, and sitting with his massive chest, his football fullback chest, looking at us as if nothing was strange. And it just about freaked Ann out. And what had happened is he had spilled ink on his shirt, and he didn't have a spare, so he just asked his secretary Helen to go out and get it cleaned. In the meantime, he continued with his appointments, bare-chested.
Bigger than life is an overused phrase, but in many ways it's very apt for Bill. I think of Bill as the proverbial bull, and the world was his china shop. Bill just plowed through and got where he wanted to go in his own way, and that was one of Bill's most lovable characteristics.
Well, Bill, as Charlie indicated, was a big bear, and anybody that ever received one of his bear hugs was left breathless as a result of it. He did have huge hands and a huge body and a huge head, but he also had a bigger heart. and he quietly assisted many of the less fortunate in our community for many, many years, very quietly, no pretension.
Something that really always struck me was how Dad always hugged us, always expressed his love to us. I mean, his love for us was amazing. I mean, he would tell anybody and everybody how much he cared for us and how much he loved us.
Always made each one of us feel like we were his favorite son. We were the special one. And you know, every time I was with him, I was his favorite son. I'm sure every time he was with Mark, Mark was his favorite son. Every time he was with Bob, my youngest brother, Bob was his favorite son.
But I have evidence that I am clearly the number one son. Take a look at this photo. Well, there you have it. Little one finger standing up. I remember my dad saying, "Who here is my favorite son?" And I was the only one that held up my finger and said, "I am, Daddy." There you go. I think I was 4 or 5 years old. To bolster this argument, my dad used to take us fly fishing in Alaska. And I believe Bill and Mark only went one time each, and I went 4. So there you have it.
He was a true character. He has always, as I say, loved the practice, but he loved his family even more and was devoted to them. He is just one terrific human being. And Guillermo, I miss you a lot.